Many successful family businesses operate a family office from inside their business. Also, some family businesses offer their families so many personalized services that they may have what constitutes a family office without even knowing it. So, when is it time to lift a family office out of the business, making the office its own entity? Today, we're talking with Ben Berger to answer this question and to also explore the benefits of separating a family office from the family business. Ben is a partner at RSM, specializing in tax services. He serves as RSM's National Family Office Enterprise Market Leader and is on the firm's Global Family Office Advisory Board. Thank you for being with me today, Ben.
Kim, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So before we jump in, what is a family office and how would we know if we had one embedded in our family business?
A family office is an enterprise, usually an entity, but not necessarily, organized to serve the needs of the family. All right. So what are those needs? Most typically, it's investments, but there's also a lot of administration. Could be accounting, could be bill pay, could be things like concierge and travel related services. It could be the philanthropy arm of the family, right? So it could be holding and running family meetings. And the activities really vary from family to family, depending on the needs, depending on the level of wealth, depending on the level of complexity, depending on how many family members there are, how many generations there are. Typically, a family office will have, dedicated people and processes, just like a business, right? So it's really an enterprise that operates like a business to serve the needs of the family. That is its business. We like to call it the business of family.
Many families probably see the combination of their business and their office as a good thing, sharing resources, expertise, maybe less expensive. So, what are the benefits of having a separate family office?
A lot of these family businesses are closely held. There's a lot of interconnectivity between the family and the business itself. And so a lot of those activities that are happening inside the business create significant complexity for the individuals and for the family. But when that happens, the family members that are the business owners turn to employees of the business to help manage some of those personal needs. It generally starts with accounting and bill pay, right? I have an executive assistant. Can you also start paying my bills? I have a controller in the business. Can you start to look after some of the cash flow needs on the family side? Can you start to look after some of the investments that I have on the personal side? And then turning ultimately sometimes to the CFO or somebody's on the CFO's team to start to handle some of these things. It starts with something really small, but it can continue to evolve and grow and balloon into something much more complex, which creates some challenges. The reason why you'd want to have something occur to create a family office outside of a business, first and foremost, it's privacy, right? So if I think about, why somebody was hired inside of a business, it's really very different than having them work with some things on the personal side. All of a sudden, they have access to credit card and bank records and investment data, right? That's not something that they were hired for. And you lose a sense of privacy, and you also lose a certain set of controls when you have somebody, working partly for the business and partly for the individual. Also, do you really have the right people, right? Again, these people were hired to run a business and to be part of a growing business. Now they're being asked to do something very different. Not to suggest that they don't necessarily have the skills to do so, but it takes time and effort to migrate them over to that other role. And sometimes they're balancing different roles, and that leads to perhaps some lack of success in both roles. And then the governance piece, right? So thinking about decision making and authority, those things are really a lot easier and cleaner when you have a separate family office. And then finally, the other point I'll make is on the reporting side, right? So a lot of times families are large, they're multiple generations. You have a lot of stakeholders, not only the multiple generations of the families, but trustees, for example, of family trusts, right? So the reporting to those stakeholders is very different than the reporting to the stakeholders of the actual business themselves. And so you need to set up a separate, more targeted reporting system in place to meet the needs of the family. And that's something that's best done outside of the business and inside a specifically targeted family office or family enterprise.
In your experience, what are some of the typical triggers that cause a business owning family to separate their family office from the business?
When it gets to a point where it starts really small and then the family continues to grow, create significant wealth for the family themselves, and all of a sudden the needs just explode, right? There's so many things that are going on that the employees that were once spending maybe 5 or 10% of their time helping or assisting or working on the family side of things are now spending 70, 80, or 90, or even 100% of their time doing that. That's a motion event that happens over time. But then there are some motion events, that happen, fairly quickly. So for example, a liquidity event, whether it's a new investor coming in or a complete sale of the business, all of a sudden, you're not going to necessarily have access to the employees of the business after that liquidity event. And you're also going to have a significant amount of wealth outside of the business that you didn't have before. And you need to be prepared to seamlessly transition from having the business to no longer having the business per se, but having, the business of running the family and this newfound liquidity, which can be used to invest in new businesses, do other kinds of things, philanthropy, et cetera. Sometimes it's embezzlement, some other compromising of some private information or confidential information. And so those kinds of things sometimes cause a family to think about, what, I really need a separation between the business and the family itself. Sometimes it's actually tax mitigation or tax deductibility concerns. If you have several employees of the business and they're not really spending time on the business, they're really spending time on the family, the payroll or the things that are paid to those professionals, may not be deductible as business expenses because they're not really performing services for the business. And so do I need to create a separate family office? And finally, I guess the last motion event I'll touch on is succession planning. So if you think about, a patriarch who perhaps created a business and then their children are coming into the business. And so that succession planning, a lot of times we see G2 or G3, generation 2 or generation 3 come in and want to do things perhaps a little bit differently and think more creatively about, what makes the most sense for the business. And so that's also what we've seen in our experience, a good time to think about lifting out the family office from being embedded in the business to being a separate entity.
These sound like a lot of advantages of separating a family office from a business. So why in general do families resist this separation?
It does take a lot of work and it does take a lot of effort. Families are really forced to sit down and really think about what do they want out of this family office, right? What are the things that they want? What are the services that they want to provide? How do they want it to be managed? How does the decision-making happen? What governance structure is in place to allow for everything to happen seamlessly? That takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. It's really like drawing up a business plan for the family office. It takes investment, right? It does take real dollars. Status quo is powerful, like we touched on, right? So thinking about, this is the way we've always done it. It works for us. But one thing that families can think about too is that, when you have a family business and you're creating a separate family office and you're lifting out, there are some resources and some vendors, for example, that you can share with the business. And so it's oftentimes better to think about it when the business is still here versus waiting for a liquidity event when there may be a clean break. And on day one after the sale, the family no longer has access to any of the systems and the employees of the actual family business itself. So thinking, ahead or thinking about it today while the business is still active, and then allowing for a separation there. So those are some of the reasons why families resist. And again, it takes a good assessment, it takes some investment, it takes some hard work. More often than not, there comes a point where a family really needs to think about this as a benefit for the family long term.
Finally, and you touched on some of these, but let's reiterate and maybe you can go a little deeper. What are some of the common advantages you've seen of lifting a family office from the business?
Operational efficiencies, I think, is where I'd like to start, right? So if you have an embedded family office where you have several employees who are doing things in the business and are also doing things for the family. Their ability to be efficient in both is not going to work. We've seen businesses that are heavily reliant on paper, right? You walk into the CEO's office and there's a pile of paper on the desk. There's things that are done, less efficiently, but creating a family office gives them an opportunity to put processes in place that are a lot more efficient, a lot more reliant on technology, automation, things like that. So you're thinking about the needs of the family and you're reacting to that and you're saying, all right, I need somebody to pay my bills. I need somebody to oversee my investments. I need somebody to do this or do that. Versus thinking much more proactively and saying, what are the needs of the family? And let's work backwards, right? Let's assess what are the needs, what do we want the family office to accomplish, to really customize and tailor the family office to do exactly what the family needs, and to allow the family office to serve the needs of a family on a much more proactive basis. So more strategic planning, more strategic investment planning, more strategic tax planning, more strategic estate planning, more planning around philanthropy, right? Being able to think about those on a much more proactive basis will certainly serve the family well. You're going to have a family office that is serving the needs of the family on a proactive basis. You're going to have a business that can focus on the business and focus on the growth of the business. And so it's really a win-win for the family enterprise as a whole.
Oh, I love it. And I can kind of hear the synergy between the two that you mentioned. So that's wonderful.
Right. And to be clear, that's a really good point. It doesn't mean that the family office and the family business aren't talking to each other, right? Clearly, there's overlap and there needs to be a communication and a collaboration between the two, for sure. But there's also the needed separation at the same time.
Thank you so much. Again, we were with Ben, who's a partner at RSM, and I'm Kim Eddleston with familybusiness.org. Thanks so much for being with me today, Ben.
I enjoyed our conversation. Thank you, Kim.